So, hello everybody, and welcome to this European Focus program on the future of Europe. Next, please. So, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to the seventh of our virtual events of the Global School at WPI. This event will explore collaborations with partners in Europe, and our goal is to bring together key stakeholders, um, partners, alumni, students, staff, faculty, with interest in our global programs in Europe. This event today will explore perspectives on America Power, how Europe views the Biden administration, the future of the European economy with perspectives from our alums, and a discussion on the future of the Earth in a critical conversations that's moderated by our Dean of the Arts and Sciences, Jean King. Next, please. So for us in the Global School and here at WPI as a whole, we're inspired by the vision of tackling local and global challenges and building demand-driven group activities that can deliver solutions and impact to the world. And we do this through research, education, and outreach, and partnerships with industry, government, academia, and non-governmental organizations. And today you'll see examples of all of these kinds of interactions and how they have contributed to the impact of our collaborations with partners in Europe. Next, please. And so for us, as we look at the future of Europe, we're excited about this next stage in our relationship. And we're excited especially to bring our STEM background into the context of the fourth industrial revolution, where you will see that many of the topics that we're already addressing in our programs are really engaging some of these areas in our partnerships with Europe. We're also excited to think about the future of work and the worker in an era in which migration is a major issue in Europe and in America and many parts of the world, and to think about what these futures can look like, especially through the kinds of projects we can do together in ways that have an impact on communities across the world. And as we do this, we're excited about environmental problem solving and challenges of energy and the environment, and issues of public goods such as global public safety in ways that we can promote through our collaborations, for example, through the efforts that we have in Greece and in many parts of Europe. And as we build further, we're excited to see our global lab, which started here at WPI, expand to have a presence in Europe through Global Lab Europe, and really think beyond that about ways of leveraging our partnerships with Europe in ways that engage the world. And so next, please. So I just thought it would be interesting to do a brief overview of what we're doing in our project centers across Europe. And the first of these is in Albania, in Tirana, directed by Bob Hirsch, is really done projects looking at preservation as well as ways of dealing with communities with earthquakes and floods. Next, please. In Denmark, in Copenhagen, we have a project center directed by Peter Hansen that is looking at challenges of the environment and climate change, but also bringing in perspectives of smart cities, circular economy, renewable energy, and women entrepreneurs in STEM as we sort of build on our relationships in Denmark. Next, please. In France, in Lyon, a relatively new project center directed by Fabienne Miller that's really exploring social entrepreneurship, migrant entrepreneurs, smart cities and mobile apps with a strong focus on local development. Next, please. And then in Greece, in Thessaloniki, Director Bob Hirsch is working on projects with preservation and then hydroponics and community gardens and alternative approaches to local agriculture, sustainable local agriculture. Next. And then in Iceland, in Reykjavik, Director Aaron Sakulich is building on projects that are addressing local inequalities, environmental sustainability projects, and different ways of safeguarding cultural heritage. Next. Next, please. And then in Venice, Director Fabio Carrera and our students and faculty have built a digital model of the streets of Venice that's known as Venipedia. They're developing smartphone games that explore displaced artwork and engaged in projects that are addressing challenges of sea level rise. Next. In Constance in Germany, we do not have a project center, but we have a German exchange program that's coordinated by Ulrike Brisson. And this is a language program that takes place in D term when our students go there and are fully immersed in a German language prep program. There's a corresponding exchange with WPI that's been very successful over the last few years. Next. And then in London, England, we have very strong collaborations with the boroughs of London, focusing on challenges of transportation and environmental sustainability in a center that's directed by Dominic Golden. Next. In Russia, in Moscow, we have a partnership with Financial University. We join projects on systems dynamics modeling of COVID, public health projects with a focus on care for the elderly, amongst others. Next. And then in Switzerland, in Zurich, we have a project center directed by Nancy Burnham with partners at the university's ZHAW, and then Credit Suisse, as well as USB, Roche, Novartis, and Stefan Storm doing projects on financial mathematics. Next. Then in our sister city in the UK, Worcester, UK, we have a project center directed by Rob Kruger and Dominic Golden, working with the city of Worcester on environmentally oriented projects. And then we have a few relatively new centers, next please, that have been established recently in Europe, in Berlin, in Prague, and in Romania. In Romania, we have Bogdan Vanescu and Rodica Neamtu working on ecotourism projects with NGOs, working with local museums, urban green spaces, as well as learning centers for disadvantaged gypsy children. We also have interactions in the Transylvania Mountains, as well as the development of a new website for the American Chamber of Commerce in Bucharest. So I hope that you can see with this range of activity that probably in Europe, we have some of the deepest relationships with partners in which WPI students, faculty, and staff are really making a difference as they engage local problems and build relationships between our institution and our European partners. Next, please. So as we look to the launch of our global school, it's exciting today to welcome all of you to this series of presentations today on Europe and the discussions on our partnerships with Europe. Our keynote speaker today will be Mark Leonard, and Mark joins an illustrious series of keynotes that we've had over the past 7 months. The first of these, of course, was Robert Langer from MIT, who is generally regarded as the Edison of medicine, who launched our virtual series. Since then, we've had talks by Nobel laureate Carlos Nobre, the ambassador from Ghana to the US, Bafo Ajebawa, and many colleagues from the Middle East, Malak Al-Khili, Melewent from Oceania, along with our own Holger Drescher, and then Meng Bo from Tsinghua University in China. And today, our guest speaker, keynote speaker, is Mark Leonard. Next, please. So Mark is the director and co-founder of the European Council on Foreign Relations. He will be talking about the crisis of America power, and he will be introduced later by our own Peter Hansen. Before then, I just want to announce that for today, the chief hosts will be Peter Hansen of WPI and, of course, Dean of Arts and Sciences, Jean King. We will have a video play that was prepared by Nancy Burnham and WPI faculty and staff. We'll also have an alumni panel that will be moderated by Peter Hansen. And this will be followed by critical conversations moderated by our own very own Dean Jean King that will talk about the circular economy and the future of the earth. And then closing remarks will be given at the end of today by Jean King and Peter Hansen. So I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. I really look forward to this event and the dialogues that will take place. And I'm excited about the future of our collaborations with Europe in our global school. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rachel. Rachel, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Burnham. I coordinated the 10-minute video you're about to see. It highlights the project centers that Wole introduced to you. We want to personalize the project centers, showing you who are the directors, who are the students, what is their impact. Unfortunately, there wasn't time to include everyone, but the 10-minute video should give you a flavor of the many, many activities in Europe. We use our own vocabulary. Our vocabulary, did you know, for example, that WPI stands for We Prefer Initials? We use the terms IQP, which stand for Interactive Qualifying Project. That's our junior level science and society project. And we use MQP, or Major Qualifying Project. That's the senior thesis. So with that, in order to stay on time, Rachel, would you start the video, please?
Hello, my name's Nancy Burnham. I'm director of the Switzerland Project Center, and it is a real pleasure for me to be involved with the Global Projects Program. I lived in Switzerland for 6 years, in Germany for 3, and that was by far the most personally enriching period of my life. And it's so rewarding for me to enable students to go there and do projects, not just take courses, but to work with the local people there. So what am I most proud of? I think it's that the students there really take their projects seriously. One project team made it to the finals of the President's IQP Awards. That's the 5 top IQPs in a year where, oh gosh, maybe there are 250 IQPs every year at WPI. Another team turned their project report into a peer-reviewed published paper in a prestigious journal. The 4 students were the first 4 authors. So I can go on, but I only have a minute or so to make my point, and go Switzerland.
Hi, my name is Arden Tanner, and I completed my MQP at the Zurich Switzerland Project Center, where my team and I built a functional model of the middle ear. It was really exciting being able to complete my MQP with Zurich researchers because of the innovative work they're conducting there, especially involving the middle ear.
Hi, I'm Rodica Niamtu.
And I'm Bogdan Vernescu.
We're the founders and directors of one of WPI's newest project centers.
Our projects will connect you with local organizations and engage you in finding solutions to complex local problems.
We hope you will join us. Welcome to Bucharest Project Center. Go Romania!
Neoma is one of Europe's leading business schools. Since fall 2018, Foisy Business School and Neoma have enjoyed an exciting exchange program. This is a perfect opportunity for any WPI student pursuing a Foisy Business School major or minor to spend a semester in the heart of Europe. My name is Renee Greener Mitchell, and I'm a mechanical engineering major with minors in robotics engineering and business. When working towards my business minor, I spent the fall 2019 semester at Neoma. During your time at Neoma, there are plenty of opportunities to travel and explore Europe. In fact, while I was taking courses there, I was able to travel around France and visit beautiful countries like Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, Andorra, Romania, and Italy. The Neoma Exchange Program is a great way to add an additional overseas experience to your WPI portfolio. Go check it out.
In post-Soviet Armenia, 40% of the people live below the poverty level. WPI teams work on projects to improve the economy, reduce poverty, promote STEM education, and develop better healthcare systems. Our students work alongside local students from the American University of Armenia, as well as local sponsors in public and private agencies. Some recent projects include developing digital records for the Armenian Eye Care Mobile Hospital, designing backyard greenhouses to jumpstart reforestation efforts, and promoting secondary school STEM programs. Go Armenia!
Bonjour, I'm Fabienne Merler, the director of the Lyon Project Center. Lyon is the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its history, art, and gastronomy bring people to Lyon. Its quality of life makes them stay. The city of Lyon cares about the environment and its inhabitants. The projects that we work with in Lyon are well aligned with the values of the city, as they focus on innovation as well as sustainable development. From Lyon, people can also visit the rest of Europe. Allez les Bleus! Go Lyon!
Hi everyone, I am Fabio Carrera, the founder and director of the Venice Project Center in Italy. We created the Venice Project Center in 1988, and our motto has been to always leave Venice better than we found it. Students from WPI have completed over 250 research projects and have won upwards of 10 President IPP Awards, establishing us as a very authoritative source of knowledge about the city of Venice and its lagoon that scholars from around the world come to consult very frequently. Currently, the Venice Project Center is headquartered in the church, the former church that you see behind me, called H3 Factory on the Giudecca Island of Venice. And it's a former church that's been rehabbed as a startup incubator. And that's where the Venice Project Center is, and that's where you'll find it if you come and visit us in Venice. Go Venice!
In Green Tech Challenge, we're making green business good business. So the main point is to fight the dichotomy that if you're making green business, you're doing it at the cost of doing good business. We did a project with the VPI in the spring. It was an IoT festival. So the main purpose of the festival was to raise awareness about the green application potential in Internet of Things technologies. So the students quite independently organized and executed a one-day festival with I believe 6 IoT startups and a bunch of other partners that came by at the Technical University of Denmark. You know, they in a very short time they managed to put up an event outside of their own home country. I think 6 or 8 companies, get keynote speakers to be there, get someone to sponsor free drinks, host the whole thing at the university, get students to attend the event, and they also attracted some press. So, I think if you think of it that way, I think the statistics for the project were actually pretty impressive if you put it up as sort of a numbers game. We kind of had to organize the festival during the Easter holiday, which was quite unfortunate, but because of the span of the project, either we would have to push it so it would go way too early for the students to actually do the work that they needed, or we would have to push it too late for them to actually be able to prepare the academic work that they would have to do. So in compromise, I think it was pretty impressive. I think there was around 100 guests that showed up at the Danish Technical University, which is in a way not in the near vicinity by Danish standards to where people live. So for 100 people to actually go all the way out there during the holidays, I was quite impressed by that.
Hi, my name is Kendra O'Malley, and I'm from Charlton, Massachusetts. I'm a mechanical engineer at WPI, and on campus I'm involved with women's track and women's basketball. The IQP process is a 14-week period in which we solve a problem. The first 7 weeks we work at WPI with a group researching and writing a proposal to a social problem that we end up solving in Copenhagen. We spend at least 20 hours a week the first 7 weeks there at Worcester, and then we came to Copenhagen, and the next 7 weeks we spent actually carrying out what we said we were going to do with the help of our sponsor. And so for 40 hours a week we worked on delivering our objectives to our project and carrying out our deliverables. Coming to Copenhagen, I had zero experience traveling by myself, but after the 7 weeks experience here, I gained so much courage to go out and explore, see new things, and it definitely makes me want to travel more when I can.
All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. Yes, we tried to give you a flavor of students, directors, sponsors. I believe Peter Hansen is on the line on the call here. He's involved with Copenhagen, and he can tell us a few things about the last 2 segments of the video that we just saw. Peter, are you here?
I am. We can talk, the two of us, about some of the different experiences, because I've had been an advisor also in Lyon and London and in other places outside of Europe, Morocco, Thailand, Namibia. And so it's a unique opportunity for all of us in the WPI community to do this kind of community engaged work where you're part of the community. You're not just, as you said in the introduction, taking classes. And the emphasis in each of these centers is a little different depending upon the interest in the local communities and the kinds of partners we're able to have. In places like Copenhagen, which is trying, as part of Denmark, as broader national goals, is trying to become carbon neutral by 2025. I think it's quite aggressive. So there's opportunities to do climate-focused research projects, lots of green education, technology work of all kinds. And students are doing work virtually during the pandemic with sponsors in a kind of virtual exchange that in Copenhagen, and I don't know if they're doing that in Switzerland, but I know last spring when I was one of the advisors with the groups of students who were supposed to go, and days before we were due to get on the plane, the lockdown arrived. We managed to continue some of that work, and it's been very valuable experience for the students then, and again this spring, to be able to work with sponsors who are in these locations. Right now, we have a group of students working with some Danish students on a use plan for open green space near a dormitory in Copenhagen. There's another partnered with a group called Lagertha, an NGO that is working to create a training program for women to become entrepreneurs in professions that have been male dominated, like shipping and construction and some fields of engineering. And one of our long-term partners is called Cycling Without Age. It has the goal of enabling the elderly to experience the feel of the wind in their hair. And so people are able to give rides on trishaws, a sort of modified bicycle, tricycle. And we're able to do a lot of interesting work with all these different sponsors.
Yeah, that's great. Copenhagen has a long history and it's very popular with the students. What I'm interested in is how you've adapted to the remote projects.
Well, very briefly, I'll just say that, many of them take place in this format. And the collaboration tools that we are all using are the ones that we're using with the project sponsors.
My students, of course, were disappointed that they didn't get to travel, but I tell them that they still have a wonderful pre-professional experience that they can talk about when they're at job interviews or grad school interviews.
That's absolutely the case. Well, thank you for putting together that video and showing those testimonials from the students and the faculty advisors. I think I'm going to move us on to the next segment of the program. And my role here is I'm delighted to co-host this with Dean Jean King, and I'll reappear later on to moderate one of the other panels. But my only role now is to introduce my colleague, Professor Crystal Brown, who will then give an introduction and moderate the next session with Mark Leonard. Right. So Crystal.
So I just want to welcome you all again. My name is Crystal Brown, and I'm an assistant professor in the Social Science and Policy Studies Department here at WPI. I'm here to welcome Mark Leonard and tell you a little bit about his work. Mark Leonard is co-founder and director of the European Council on Foreign Affairs, which is the first pan-European think tank. His topics of focus include geopolitics, geoeconomics, China, EU politics, and institutions. Leonard hosts the weekly podcast, Mark Leonard's Work in 30 Minutes, and writes a syndicated column on global affairs for Project Syndicate. Mark has spent time in Washington, D.C. as a transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States and in Beijing as a visiting scholar at the Chinese Academy for Social Sciences. As well as writing and commenting frequently in the media and on global affairs, Mark is an author of 2 best-selling books. His first book, Why Europe Will Run the 21st Century, was published in 2005 and translated into 19 languages. Leonard's second book, What Does China Think?, was published in 2008 and translated into 15 languages. His most recent book, coming in May 2021, is called The Age of Unpeace, How Connectivity Causes Conflict. In this book, he addresses how the 21st century with global trade, migration, and the internet were expected to create wealth and opportunities for all. But to whatever extent they fulfilled this promise, there have also been escalated issues of trade wars, skyrocketing inequality, cyber attacks, and of course now we're in a global pandemic. Today, he will talk about European attitudes of Biden's administration and the US, and the future role of the US in Europe and really across the world. He will speak first, and then I'll open the discussion up for questions. Thanks so much, Mark, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing you speak about the perspective of Europeans on the US, on the Biden administration. Welcome virtually to WPI.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here with you. I'm going to use some slides. I'm just going to hopefully start sharing a presentation with you. Is that okay? Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Great, fantastic. As Crystal said, I'm going to talk about how Europeans look at Biden's America and what that means for America's role on the world stage. And what I'm going to do is talk you through a poll which we did in a dozen different European countries shortly after the US election. And the presentation is called "The Crisis of American Power" because just around the time that we were polling, we had these sort of double crises which were ongoing. One was a sort of crisis of American democracy, which was a lot of which played out in the weeks before the poll, and in fact got even worse in the weeks after with the events around the Capitol. But underlying that, or maybe related to that, is also a sense that power is shifting away from America, which has got profound implications for both the transatlantic relationship, but also how the US is seen and what the possibilities are for it in different parts of the world. So the polling which we did was in 11 countries. We had samples of about 2,000 in the biggest countries in Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. But we had smaller samples of 1,000 in some of the other countries: Denmark, Spain, Hungary, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, and Sweden. And the polling took place just after the elections in late November, early December in all of these different countries. In a sort of sentence, what we found was that Europeans were very happy to see Biden elected, but they had profound doubts about the promise that America can come back as a global leader. And that led to some quite radical and in some ways quite disturbing ideas about the future of politics and what options are available to their own governments. So I'll start with the sort of happy news, which is the fact that Europeans were happy with the results of the election. Most people didn't think it had a kind of huge impact on them and their families, but they did think that there was a large or a small but positive difference on their country and on the European Union as a whole. We asked a series of questions about people's reactions to the election, but by and large, as you can see from this table, at least half of them felt that they were much more optimistic or somewhat more optimistic after the elections. Only 10% were more pessimistic. We asked also a series of questions about whether they thought that the US was on the right or wrong track under President Trump. And what was interesting about that was that right across the EU, people thought that America was on the wrong track. And even though some European governments, such as the Polish and the Hungarian governments, had very close relationships with President Trump, at the level of public opinion, there were much less divisions about what was going on. But in spite of these sort of positive attitudes towards the election results and towards President Biden, we saw quite a lot of doubts about the sort of health of the US. The first question, I think, is very striking. We asked people whether they thought that the political system in the United States works well or is broken. And what you see from that is that over 60% think that it's either completely broken or somewhat broken. And that is highest in a lot of the countries that have traditionally been the most sympathetic to the United States of America. So 81% of people in the UK think it's completely broken or somewhat broken. Over 70% in Germany think it's completely broken or somewhat broken. Secondly, we asked people how they felt about the American people and what that meant for their sense of the US as a partner. And one of the questions we asked was whether people agreed or disagreed with this statement after they voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Americans can't be trusted to vote the right way. And what you found is that a third of Europeans agreed with that statement. Only 27% disagreed with it. But what's interesting is in Germany, the most important country in Europe, over half of the population agrees with that statement that Americans can't be trusted anymore. So there's both the sense the political system's broken. Secondly, that the US is an unreliable partner because you could end up with presidents like Trump re-emerging after 2016. But it gets even murkier when you look not at questions to do with American democracy, but rather to do with American power. And the next question is quite sort of humbling as well. We asked people whether they believe that in 10 years' time, China will or will not be a stronger power than the United States of America, and found that 60% of Europeans almost agree with the statement that China will be a stronger power than the US. And that is true in almost all the countries. In fact, in every single country apart from Denmark, you have a majority that thinks that the US will be less powerful than China. So if you add all that up together, this idea that the political system's broken, that you can't trust the American people, that China, that China's going to overtake the US as well. And then we have this sort of fourth question, which is also very striking, which is we ask people how much they depend on the US for their security and how much they need the security guarantee from the United States. And the interesting part of this table is the left-hand column, the dark blue figures, because it's those people who think that it's existential. They think that you need it a great deal. And again, what's very striking to me there is the figures in Germany, where only 1 in 10 people think that the security guarantee is existential. And on the other hand, almost a third of Germans think that they don't need the American security guarantee very much, or indeed at all. I was less surprised that you have almost identical figures for that in France, but the German figures are very striking, given how important the security guarantee has been to Germany's rehabilitation as a civilized nation after the Second World War and its role in the Cold War. But also, if you look at the other countries, apart from Poland, the numbers of people who see the security guarantee in those sort of existential terms are quite small. It's a minority everywhere. So that's the sort of analysis of how people look at the US and the world. And what it's leading to is quite a profound rethinking of the relationships which Europeans have with America going forward, ones which I think should give one some pause for thought. There are various different kind of policy consequences that people draw from it. The first is this question about alignment. We asked this question about what they think their country should do if there's a disagreement between the US and China. And what you find quite shockingly is that 60% of people think that they want their country to stay neutral, and only 22% in the aggregate want to take the US side. This is something that we first found a couple of years ago when we asked this question the very first time. But a lot of people, particularly my friends in the Biden administration, assumed that this was much more a reflection of people's attitudes towards President Trump rather than to the United States as a whole, and that things would snap back. But they haven't yet snapped back, and that is something which is obviously quite a sobering finding, given that one of the key projects of the Biden administration is to reach out to allies, democratic allies, with a view to working with them to shape China's rise and to make sure that that the US takes full advantage of being embedded in a set of relationships with other democracies in terms of dealing with the China challenge in years ahead. We also found that you got a similar response when we asked people about a disagreement between Russia and the US. Much higher levels of support in some countries for the US than on China. It goes up to 40% in Denmark, 36% in Poland. But still, even in those countries, there are more people who want to stay neutral than to take the US side. And we've been trying to work out why that is. But I think the sort of general sense that we have is not that people are unsympathetic to the Biden administration's plans or to where the US is heading, what its intentions are, but rather a fear that the United States is maybe not sufficiently powerful to win a Cold War 2.0 or sufficiently focused on European interests to make it safe to put all of their eggs in the basket of a kind of closer alignment with the United States. This maybe leads to the sort of second set of findings, which is to do with investing in European defense capabilities. We gave people these two options when we asked them whether they thought which statement which they agreed with. So one option was Europe can't always rely on the US, so we need to look after our own defense capabilities. And the other option was that the US will always protect Europe, so we don't have to worry so much about our own defense capabilities. And what you found there is that 67%, over 2/3 of Europeans agreed with the first statement that you can't always rely on the US, so we need to look after our own defense capabilities. And that sentiment is shared by a majority in every single country, even Germany and the Netherlands, who are the least enthusiastic about it. 60% of people agree with that statement. The third sort of dimension is to do with the future of the economy. One of the sort of concerns of a lot of the people I spoke to in the Biden administration was that after Trump, there should be a sort of process of engaging much more closely with American allies on economic issues and to find ways of having deeper cooperation in order not least to push back on China's distortions of the market. But what we found when we asked people whether they thought their country should be tougher or more relaxed with the US on economic issues is that there was relatively little enthusiasm for relaxing the economic relationship and going for a kind of greater rapprochement with the US. 17% of voters in the aggregate, 26% think that the current levels are about right, and 35% want to be tougher. And anyway, you can see that those sort of sentiments are sort of shared more or less across the EU, though there are sort of variations between different countries. The fourth set of consequences are maybe the most kind of surprising and interesting, which is to do with questions of diplomatic focus. We asked people which were the three most important countries for their own country to develop a close relationship with. And what we found, to our surprise, was that in many countries now, Europeans are looking to their neighbors rather than to Washington as the number one partner. So in Germany, the biggest number of people mentioned France as the place that they were looking to. In Denmark, it was Berlin. In Spain, it was Berlin. In France, it was Berlin. In Hungary, it was Berlin. Italy, Poland, and the UK all still had Washington ahead of Berlin, and Sweden was almost evenly divided between the two. But it's very striking that many countries are now looking to Berlin rather than Washington as the most important country to have a good relationship with. One of the other things which was quite interesting about our poll was to get a sense of how people thought about the relative performance of different players, because power is obviously something which is relative rather than seen in absolute terms. So we asked people to start imagining who was going to do well and who was going to do badly in the next century. And we kind of split them into 4 different tribes. So we had one group of people who thought that both Europe and America would do well and were going to do well in the next century. We called that group In the West We Trust. Another group of people thought that Europe is going to do well, but the US will do badly. We called that group In Europe We Trust. A third group of people thought that the US will do well, but Europe will do badly. We called that group In America We Trust. And then we had a kind of fourth group that thought that both America and Europe are going to do badly in the next century and that the future belongs to the non-Western powers, to China and to Russia. We called that group In Decline We Trust. And anyway, you'll see from the next couple of slides how these different groups fared, both in the aggregate, but also in individual countries. So in the aggregate, we were surprised to find that, well, on the plus side, only a minority of people are kind of declinists overall. The biggest group was the group which we called In Europe We Trust, so people who think that that Europe is going to do well in the future and the US is going to do badly and will decline. The second biggest group was In Decline We Trust, the thinking that both Europeans and Americans will do badly at 29%. The third group was In the West We Trust, people who thought that both Europe and America will do well. And the smallest group was the group which we called In America We Trust, who think that Europeans will decline, but the US will do well. What's interesting about those 4 groups is that they are split very differently between different European countries. And I'll show you the sort of division of those countries on the next slide. And what you find there is that there's sort of quite distinct groupings which are seem to come out of different geographies. So on the one hand, you have a sort of Northern European group, which is very well represented in Germany, in Denmark, in Sweden, who are very optimistic about the future. So only very small numbers of people think that Europe and America are going to decline. But the biggest groups by a long margin are those who think that America is going to decline and that Europe is going to do well. So in Denmark, it's 60% who form part of that Europe group, 53% in Germany, 50% in the Netherlands, 51% in Sweden. Then you have a sort of second group, which is sort of Southern Europeans, France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, where you have the largest groups who are the declinists. And then after that, you have sort of reasonably large group of thinking that Europe is going to do well and the US will do badly. But it's a strikingly high representation of the declinists. And then there's a sort of third group, which are more, and the UK in a strange way is a sort of honorary member of the Southern European group. And then you have a kind of final group, which are Eastern Europeans. If you look at Poland and Hungary, where people are very enthusiastic about the West as a whole, that's the largest group. So you have 50% in that group in Hungary and 48% in Poland. So that is the most of the data that I found. What I think is very interesting about this is that it poses some really quite profound questions for different players when they think about the future of the transatlantic relationship and America's role in the world. I think for the Biden administration, it's quite humbling to see how skeptical people are about the future of American democracy and of American power. And there does seem to be a real challenge from those figures on neutrality in terms of executing on this idea of reaching out to allies and finding a new way of invigorating the democratic world to shape the policy options available to China. It shows that it's going to be very difficult to get Europeans on board, and that I think the best way of doing that is going to be to make a case for a new type of Atlanticism that's rooted in common interests, rather than assuming that values and shared history will get European countries over the line. There are real doubts about America's reliability as an ally, its staying power, and how closely aligned its interests are with European interests, which seem to have been very much accentuated by the 4 years of the Trump administration. And in that sense, I think the Trump administration leaves some quite long shadows. Also interesting questions for Europeans. On the surface, this poll seems to back up a lot of the rhetoric from more interventionist leaders like Emmanuel Macron, who wants to develop European sovereignty and strategic autonomy. You can see very strong levels of support for investing in European defense, for being tougher on economic issues. But at the same time, the figures on neutrality raise questions about whether the goal which Europeans have is to be players in this new great power competition, or whether, in fact, what it really is when they talk about European sovereignty and strategic autonomy is a kind of application for a retirement home from global politics, because they want to be neutral on the big issues going forward. I've been talking for as long as I wanted to. There's lots more that I could say about this data, also about where we are at the moment, but I think maybe I will stop there and open the discussion. Happy to answer any questions which people have, and also to take the conversation in any direction that you find useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was a very informative survey that you carried out in Europe. And so we do have some questions of folks who typed in the chat box. If you have a question that you want to give to Mark, make sure to type it in the Q&A box that's available at the bottom of your screen. Before I get into the questions that a couple folks have written, I want to ask you, so it seems as though Europe has kind of a negative view of at least the US, and it stems from not only President Trump's 4 years in office, but other factors as well, and it's spilling over into President Biden's time in office. So I want to ask you, when this survey was carried out, it looks as though it was carried out during the pandemic. And I wonder, and the survey is kind of hitting at Germany, which becoming more like a centralized power in Europe, in the continent of Europe. And then we have China rising as a rising power, not only in Asia, but across the world. And obviously the US still a world power. Do you think with the pandemic that's been happening for a year now, that we are moving more towards a multipolar system rather than a unipolar system where the US is at the top and other countries are kind of following the US's leadership? Do you think we're moving towards a multipolar system, or do you think in the future it will be a unipolar system where China is at the top, or maybe even Russia? What do you think the implications of your research are in terms of a multipolar system? But also I want to link in the idea of, do you think the pandemic has caused people in different regions of the world to focus more along the lines of their area, their region, rather than outwards towards other countries? So it looks as though Europe is focusing inward, right? They see China as a rising power. They see the US as a dwindling power, but Europeans seem to be focused more on Europe, their member countries, and so on and so forth. Can you speak to that?
Sure. No, it's a great question. I think what our poll shows is that people's ideas about global order were given quite a rude awakening by the pandemic. When it struck, people felt very alone we asked, I haven't shown you that data, but we did a few surveys, and we found that many people felt that their countries were basically left on their own, that they couldn't look to the US, they couldn't look to China, they couldn't look to many other players for help. And the way that the Trump administration handled the pandemic obviously had a very negative impact on people's on the credibility of the US. The fact that, I mean, it might have changed now with the vaccine rollout, but in the early days, the levels of death, the amount of internal tension around the coronavirus seemed to play very badly in terms of the credibility of the US response. But equally, people felt that China was there was a lot of negative perceptions of China as a result of its management of the crisis, and particularly the way that it was using masks and other techniques to bully different countries. And so there's worries about supply chains and about globalization, and that led to more of a sense of wanting to take back control, to repatriate supply chains, particularly on medical issues, but also on less sensitive parts. So I think in people's minds, as you said, there is both a kind of sense that the world's becoming more multipolar. There are also just questions about how interested the US is in working with Europeans, which I think were exacerbated by the fact that the Trump administration was obviously not that interested in working closely with Europeans, introduced sanctions against various different European countries. And then kind of worries about China bullying different countries. So they're sort of thinking about how they can respond to that. So that has led to a surge of interest in European sovereignty and European integration. These things are just snapshots. So it'll be very interesting to see where we are in a year or two's time. And I'm sure that the Biden administration will be trying to change perceptions of it. But at the moment, I think the way that you summed it up at the beginning is absolutely right. That people felt that China is rising, the US is declining, but also that globalization seems to be falling apart a bit, and that in that kind of world, one of the best solutions, as everyone tries to keep their people safe and to protect themselves from external pressure, is going to be to work on a European level, because a lot of the countries in Europe are too small to avoid being bullied on their own. So that leads to a kind of desire for European integration. What we found, interestingly, was there's a lot of skepticism about the existing EU institutions. So it wasn't that people loved Brussels, but they just felt the need to work together because they were worried about being bullied by others.
Great, thank you. So I have a question from the audience. It says, how does Brexit play out in the typology and the future strength of Europe?
So I think that, again, it's quite difficult to extrapolate that much from the poll that I just showed you. I mean, in my own mind, I think that what Brexit did was it created an interesting and surprising surge in support for the European Union and European integration in other countries. Often you don't really know how much you miss something until there's a risk of actually losing it. And I think that was one of the things that happened in the early days of Brexit. It was seen for most of the last sort of 3-4 years since the referendum in June 2016 that Brexit was not working out very well for the UK. So a lot of the Eurosceptic parties that wanted to withdraw from the European Union in other countries had to reinvent themselves. And they talk now about the refounding Europe, having a different kind of Europe rather than leaving Europe and the euro. I wonder how much that is now changing as a result of the vaccination story, because the UK has done better at vaccinating its people than the EU, and that has definitely, I think, had at least a short-term effect on perceptions within the UK about Brexit. And I wonder whether it is playing out in other countries. That happened after our survey took place. But this is the first time that there is a sort of positive story about Brexit, which people might be noticing in other countries. And, in terms of the kind of idea of a Europe that could play a role on the world stage, obviously losing the UK is a blow, because the UK, is responsible for 1/6 of the EU budget. It's one of the two permanent members of the UN Security Council. It has more defense spending than any other country in the EU apart from France. So there is a real loss there. But on the other hand, what one might see is a greater coming together of the remaining 27 countries, and it's still not clear how well European Union member states and the UK are going to work together in the future. There's a lot of tension at the moment. It's a kind of acrimonious divorce, so it's too early to see really close cooperation taking place. But at the same time, there are huge overlaps between the interests of the UK and the EU. So it might be that you have a very strong special relationship emerging. Also, once things have had a chance to cool down and to settle. But in the short term, what it is doing is creating quite a lot of tensions and still consuming a lot of political time and energy, and there are lots of unresolved issues around the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland at the moment.
So I have another question. It's in the chat box, but I want to remind folks, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So the next question I have is, this person writes, it's interested in improving relations with Germany. So one of the comments is, it seems as though Europe in general is interested in improving relations with Germany. Do you think this is because of political stability that Angela Merkel has provided over the past 16 years? Or do you think it's more about economic power, or is it both? So do you think the look towards Germany is about economic power or stability that Merkel has provided over the past 16 years?
I think it's both. I mean, I think that the economic power is obviously a really important part of the political dynamics of the EU in recent years. The euro, is very much built around the German economy. And if you think about the important economic relationships with other parts of the world, Germany looms very large because of the structure of its economy. So if you look at European trade with China, Germany on its own trades as much with China as the other 26 member states of the European Union combined. In fact, it trades more with China than the whole of the rest of the EU. So the economy is very important. Germany is also a big net contributor to the EU budget. So lots of people depend on Germany for those reasons. And Germany plays an outsized role in the management of the euro. So that there's a sort of economic basis for German power. But at the same time, if you think about the big questions, I mean, as you were saying, if you look at the European Union's relationship with Russia, Germany has played a really, really important stabilizing role in terms of bringing the whole of the European Union together behind a robust response to the annexation of Crimea and the sanctions regimes. And Germany is becoming more self-confident on other questions as well, whether it's about relationship with the Balkans, with Turkey. Sometimes it finds itself in a position where it's behaving in a way that's quite polarizing. On the refugee crisis, Germany actually was seen in many member states as actually creating problems within the European Union. Other people strongly admired the stance that Angela Merkel took, but I think it's a relation, because of Germany's economic importance, it will matter a huge amount, whoever's in charge. But it's true that Angela Merkel has been an incredibly sort of stable and solid presence for a very, very long time. So that is raising lots of questions in people's minds about what happens after September this year when the election takes place, when Germany will be under new management. I suspect that because of the structure of the German political system, there won't be huge change. There won't be any revolutionary changes in German policy, but Angela Merkel obviously does know so many people within the EU, and also for outsiders, she was the go-to person to call, whether it's people sitting in the White House or in the Balkans or in China. So her absence will lead to a kind of political vacuum. And I'm sure other people will try and fill that. You know, Emmanuel Macron has been very active. There are other players like Mark Rutte in the Netherlands who've been around for a while who are being more active. And in some ways, European politics over the last few years has been partly a kind of fight to fill the vacuum that the UK has left. And there'll be a new vacuum when Angela Merkel leaves.
I have a couple more questions, but before I get to the other questions, I want to talk a little bit more about Angela Merkel. And she's been in power for a number of years and has provided a lot of stability, I would argue, for Germany. Do you think her being a woman plays any impact on providing stability, or you think that has nothing to do with her leadership? And we also know the Queen of England, she's going to be, today's her birthday. She's 95 today. And obviously the UK is in Europe, but it's no longer part of the European Union. But these are powerful women who are on the continent of Europe. So can you speak to what you think the role of women in politics in Europe plays, or how they might provide, if you think so, more stability, especially when we think of Angela Merkel?
Well, there was a sort of narrative at the beginning of the coronavirus that female leaders were doing a much better job of preparing their countries to deal with the coronavirus. Angela Merkel was one of the examples cited, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Finland was another country that was performing well with a young and dynamic female prime minister. Denmark with Mette Frederiksen. I don't know to what extent gender has played a role in their ability to deal with the coronavirus, but I do think that we are entering a period of politics where increasingly there are issues which were absent from the political scene, which are becoming more and more important. And if you think about dealing with the corona crisis and events at the last time, the fact that a lot of these leaders had a greater sensibility around a lot of the sort of issues which we've been grappling with in our everyday lives, how to deal with the time squeeze, with work-life issues, with children, the environment, a lot of these sorts of issues, which are not the sort of classic issues around which politics was organized over the last few decades. It might be that the female leaders are able to both understand these issues better than some of their male counterparts who are more sort of focused on the sort of more sort of classic hard security and other kinds of issues. But I don't really know whether that's the case. I think it's wonderful that politics is no longer simply a male preserve, and that you have so many powerful women in different positions of authority around the world. There's a very mixed picture in Europe. You have some countries where you have a really, really modern, equal, strongly participative system, which doesn't only have a lot of inclusion on issues around gender, but are very diverse, and where the government is a perfect reflection of the societies that they're serving. But there are a lot of European countries that are not like that as well. And it's a sort of perpetual struggle. But I think those issues are increasingly coming to the fore and are playing out in really interesting ways, which a lot of the kind of traditional elites have been grappling with in European countries. I'm not sure. I think it was an interesting coincidence, but the corona virus has also been a bit of a roller coaster. So a lot of the countries that everyone thought were doing brilliantly at the beginning of the crisis are now struggling a bit more. So Germany is much more. A lot of my German friends and colleagues are very frustrated that the government hasn't been quicker with its vaccine program. So there are kind of new questions being asked. I suspect at the end of the day, some of those things will they'll catch up and they'll kind of equalize. And people, when you look at the overall track record of Germany dealing with the crisis, it will, I'm sure, be very impressive at the end. But it's difficult to speak in categorical terms. I certainly don't feel qualified to fully answer your question.
Well, thank you for trying. I just thought I would ask you. So the next question I have is from somebody from the virtual audience. It says, what does this all mean for the Global South? How do you think this shift in changing will impact the Global South?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways what I've been talking about is the sort of the shuffling of deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, if the world is, the big kind of mega trends that are going on about power being exercised in the North and the West and moving to the South and the East, and their relationship between Europeans and Americans does feel a bit like yesterday's questions. If you're looking at it from the Global South, if you're sitting in Delhi or in Lagos or other kind of countries that are looking at quite big tectonic shifts in the distribution of power and the way that our economies work. But I think it's interesting to see the way that Europeans are conceptualizing these things, because in many ways, those are the same questions which leaders in other countries are looking at as we move towards a post-Western world. The US isn't playing the same sort of dominant role that it did in any theater, whether it's in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East. The US is still the most powerful country in the world. It's a symbol of all sorts of very attractive features about politics in different places. But people have also had a kind of ringside seat at a lot of the really troubling debates about American history, about American identity, about the kind of dysfunctionality of a lot of political institutions over the last period of time, which has led to these questions both about American staying power and about the health of American democracy, but also they can see that China is rising and that is and that China's developing different kinds of relationships. If we go back 15 years, 80% of the world had the US as their biggest trading partner. Now, China is the number one trading partner to 70 or 75% of countries around the world. So there has been a kind of big shift. And I think in many countries in the Global South, they've been ahead of the curve on that. And a lot of them have built very close relationships with China, did see China as a sort of savior from the Washington consensus and the Western dominated world. In many of those countries, they're now, a backlash against China in different ways, and there are disappointments. But I think that they're going through the same sort of calculations that Europeans are at the moment, and are thinking differently about how they build relationships with different players. And I think, like Europeans, their number one concern is probably about how they can maintain control of their own affairs. A lot of people in the Global South have been at the sharp end of colonialism, have seen their freedoms trampled on by external players. And they're thinking carefully about how they can build different types of relationships with Europeans, with Americans, with the Chinese, but which maximize their control over their own affairs.
Thanks. And I know that there's a lot of, when I talked earlier a little bit about multipolar powers rising, or even if we think of like just a lot of people who, a lot of my research deals with migration. So you have this return migration to, like, for instance, Nigeria or Uganda, where people who might have worked and lived in the United States or in a Western European country are going back to their African country and reinvesting and building up the infrastructure and lives of people there. So there's a number of movements to this returning home and reinvesting in the Global South. I think that's happening at a larger scale. The last question I want to ask you is, what role do you think academics should play in influencing this discussion? How do you think academics, we are a university, we do research, we teach, and we are on the forefront of innovative technology. How do we influence this discussion, our students, our research, our work? What are some tips that you can give us?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to help people to understand what's going on in the world. So much of the mistakes which people have made in international relations have been based on wishful thinking, on misunderstanding other players, and often we are lacking curiosity about how other people see the world, and we try and we project our own kind of sentiments and feelings on other players, and therefore kind of misunderstand them. So I think one of the really useful roles that academics can play is actually doing detailed granular research on what the world looks like in different localities, and then trying to bring that to life and trying to explain that to different players. I think that a lot of the problems that we're facing in the 21st century are ones which cut across borders. So having both a sense of what these cross-cutting issues are, whether it's climate change or pandemics or new security questions or cyber, and then relating that to the sort of political dynamics and the way that and the sensibilities of different parts of the world. I think that's something which is really, really difficult and complicated, and where governments are very badly set up to both understand the kind of technical issues that we're dealing with, but then also to think about how they play out in terms of winners and losers in different places, and how you could actually go about building political coalitions for change. So I think that maybe that's one of the most useful things that academics can do, is to make sure that the political class both understands what's going on the substance of these issues, but then is curious enough about how it's seen in different parts of the world, so you can actually have an effective diplomatic approach, which is designed to solve these wicked problems, which, if we don't grapple with in the next few years, could very well end up leading to the extinction of our species.
Very true. I agree 100%. Thank you so much, Mark, for presenting and your research and the things that you've been working on. It's been awesome talking to you. For the rest of the audience, we will have a 5-minute break occurring from 9:50 until 9:55. But before the break is up, we will have a couple slides that you can watch about the IQP projects and project centers in Europe. So thank you everyone for joining us. Mark, again, great presentation. And you guys all asked awesome questions in the audience. Have a great break. Have a great rest of your evening, I think it is where it's evening right now. So enjoy your evening/afternoon. Take care, 5-minute break, come back a little bit earlier to watch the slides about the project centers in Europe. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hello, and welcome back. I'm Peter Hansen, Professor of History and Director of International and Global Studies at WPI. I have the honor of serving as the moderator for this next panel of distinguished European alumni from WPI. Over the next 45 minutes, we will discuss the outlook for European business and the global economy as we enter the post-pandemic world. And I'm delighted to introduce each of the panelists right now. And then we will invite them to speak briefly for about 5 or 6 minutes each, and then we'll have a general discussion. So we're very happy to welcome Belin Bayoglu, who's class of 2009, a Bachelor's of Science in Economics and Industrial Engineering at WPI. She's a Structure of Financial Products for Emerging Markets at BNP Paribas in London. She's originally from Cyprus. Sergio Levy, class of 88, electrical engineering graduate of WPI, is Vice President and Head of Strategic Alliances at Philips Healthcare in London. He is originally from Milan, Italy. Menelaos Tassopoulos received a master's degree in 1985 in chemical engineering and is the Chief Executive Officer of Papoutsanis SA, a leading European soap manufacturer based in Athens, Greece. Each of the panelists will speak for about 5 to 6 minutes about their perspectives on looking ahead from their particular positions towards the post-pandemic future for business and the economy. After sharing these initial thoughts, we will begin the discussion with one another and invite you to submit your questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom. You may submit those questions into that feature at any time. I will monitor those and ask the questions of the panelists. So we will begin with Sergio Levy, followed by Menelaos Tassopoulos, and then Belin Bayoglu. So Sergio, go ahead.
There you go. Now I'm muted. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. I'm delighted to be back with the WPI community, even if virtually. As Peter introduced me, I work for Philips. Philips is a very different company than maybe people remember when we were in the business of televisions or radios. The company is entirely focused on healthcare. So I'll bring a perspective from my experience by working with Philips in the domain of healthcare. And of course, even recent events around COVID, this has been at the center of the global attention. And even before COVID, I would say there were already some profound trends that are shaping the sector. I would say the first one is really one of resource constraints. I was reading recently, there is about a shortage globally of about 6 million nurses. But then if you look at it across multiple domains, whether it's pathologists and radiologists, there's shortages everywhere. I mean, healthcare is basically a market with infinite demand. So as you allow more access, the demand is always there. But clearly there is a shortage in professionals at various levels. And I think even when you double click into those professionals that work in healthcare, you find quite of a concerning picture. We did a survey around the young doctors across multiple countries, and it turns out that 74% express a sense of stress regularly in their daily activities, and even about a third even contemplated leaving the profession because of stress. And the topic of clinician burnout is quite well known in the industry, which is even more concerning when you think about that medical errors is about a third cause of death, and 80% of it usually is miscommunication around doctors as handoffs take place. So clearly something around those resources and the constraining environment in which they work. The second trend is also one of an aging population and the rise of really chronic illnesses. I mean, we live longer. This puts more stress onto health systems, and we've seen actually with COVID that actually those that were most hardly hit were those with poorly managed chronic conditions. Third point is one of increasing consumer engagement. I think patients want to be part of the decision more and more so. We've seen the rise of wearable devices, whether it's Fitbit-like devices or people immediately having access to a lot of information via Google. They just want to be informed. They want to know what's going on. There's clearly an opportunity, particularly with wearable devices, to work around also behaviors, because interesting enough, that's probably one of the biggest determinants of health is behavior, and it's an area that usually the clinician does not have a lot of insight on. And then the last, and we'll probably speak about it quite a bit, is one of digitalization. I mean, healthcare is an industry where up until not recently, the vast majority of the communication happened via fax. The NHS here in the UK, where I'm based, is the largest buyer of fax machines in the world. So digitization brings really that consistency, that ability to apply protocols and best practices. And we hear about AI and cloud. And here there's just one big caveat with this industry, is that the Silicon Valley fail fast and break things approach does not work. There is obviously, for obvious reasons, a lot of conservative attitudes toward adoption of new technologies, and really it's the change management versus a technology push that will make a difference in the sector. And clearly, I don't have to explain to a U.S. audience what are the economics realities of healthcare. Everybody sees their own insurance prices explode. But there's clearly things that need to change for healthcare to continue to be affordable. We live in a world of volume and response. It's effectively based on fee for service. You pay regardless of the outcome, and then you'll be treated, whenever there is an issue, with not a lot of emphasis on prevention. The reimbursement system is just not set up for prevention, is there to take care of you when you're sick. So actually, as a matter of fact, some people sort of call it healthcare, they call it sick care, because that's really indeed what it is. And there is an emerging movement around value-based care, where actually payment is made based on outcomes, successful outcomes, and the quality of the care that you've received. And again, this is going to be possible mostly because of digitalization and the ability to measure and quantify what that outcome and quality is. And then, again, we are in a world today where most of the care is in hospitals, so it's episodic and the access is limited. And today, again, thanks to technology, we're trying to look at models where we have a much more decentralized way of providing care, even including based in your own home. Thanks to, again, we talked about some of the wearables or remote patient monitoring. Many things are enabled by digital, change the economics of the system as it is today. And again, change also the access side, because what we've seen is, again, with COVID, the importance of delivering the care even to the more vulnerable communities. And again, technology is a big hope for that to happen. Again, retailerization of health, making it, delivering it in settings that are lower cost and are not necessarily in a home. Now, underlying all this is obviously the opportunity that comes with the use of healthcare data. All the people say data is the new oil, and I've put there, AI as first and foremost, because I don't know of very many other tools that can offer quality, cost, and access improvements all at the same time. So great opportunity there, but still quite a few constraints. First of all, particularly in Europe, most of the care and the healthcare system is based around government reimbursements. They also government determines the rules under which this data is going to be used. And of course, in Europe, we have applied and follow strictly GDPR. And here, this is an interesting point, which is, well, different countries follow different approaches as to the level of privacy and ability to use particularly healthcare data for secondary use. And here there is a debate that can be had as to, what is the trade-off that nations make between, accelerating some of these technological changes, creating new opportunities in the country in terms of new companies that can emerge by leveraging the data. We've seen large companies like Google or Amazon effectively build enormous market caps based on that data. which in Europe today, in most cases, is largely government controlled, but not exploited for commercial purposes. So does that create a competitive advantage if you loosen up and trade off some of the regulations, which today in Europe are quite strict? And lastly, I think from a technology standpoint, I don't know how many people in this call would be familiar with Gaia X. It's a Europe-wide initiative that started from the Ministries of Economic Affairs in France and Germany, and being extended to the EU level. And really, this is trying to address the problem of cloud and data sovereignty. Most of the cloud workloads today and data is stored and processed, whether it's healthcare or another domain, with cloud providers that are not European. And you started to see the rise of Google's and AWS and Microsoft. The United States has a considerable lead in this domain. In China, we've seen all the debate with Huawei and some of the Chinese platform, but the Europeans today do not have cloud leadership, do not have the companies that can compete at this level. But yet, all of the data and all the processing depends on these companies, which has raised a political debate around sovereignty around this critical infrastructure. So just like people consider critical infrastructure things like water, electricity, clearly, cloud computing seems to be one that is rising and many new questions being raised. So that closes my intervention there, Peter.
Okay, Menelaus.
Hello, thanks for having me at this panel. Myself, coming from the industry, we are a soap and cosmetic manufacturer located in Greece, but over half of our sales they're exported primarily to Europe, plus the US. So I would like to share with you some thoughts on regarding how the post-pandemic, how the environment will look versus before. So until the pandemic, the globalization was the key driver in most decisions, where everybody was trying to optimize cost, source everything the most efficient way, without taking into consideration potential disruptions that might occur in logistics or because of lack of local production and sourcing capabilities. During the pandemic, especially during the first stages of the pandemic, we all remember the difficulty that very well-off countries like the US, Germany, France, Italy were facing, for example, with sourcing personal protective measures or key equipment, a lot of which Philips is manufacturing for assisting with getting oxygen, but also with let's say more simpler products, like for example antiseptic and even soap. So what we are seeing already is that a lot of countries and a lot of companies, they're reconsidering their strategy until now, and they start talking about the need to have some local capabilities of production and sourcing of raw materials even if this may mean that cost will not necessarily be optimized. The same is with logistics and supply chains, where again people are moving and companies are moving away from necessarily the just in time, and the additional considerations take become of equal importance. Another effect of all these disruptions that happened during the pandemic, and which we are just seeing and experiencing and living through these days, has to do with the prices of the commodities, where again at the first like most of 2020, prices of everything went to reach their historical lowest. In certain cases, we had even the problem of having to deal with the cost of storing something, and this cost becoming more higher than the product itself. I remind you of oil prices during the second quarter of 2020, but also of transportation. And now we see exactly the opposite, where oil prices have gone are quite high. When we are talking about commodities like palm oil or certain metals, they are at their highest ever, and the same is true for transportation. When it comes to transportation, for example, cost of container from China to Europe or from China to the US and vice versa has more than tripled versus last year and year before last. One thing that did change and for some time during the pandemic was the focus on sustainability and the environment in general. Until 2020, until the end of, let's say, 2019, there was a big focus on sustainability, and everybody was trying to modify whatever they were producing and the ways they were producing whatever they were producing in a way that was as environmentally friendly as possible, and with the least effect with respect to carbon footprint, use of plastics, etc. During 2020, because of health considerations, which obviously become more important, these considerations kind of became less important. And an example is the various coffee shops. While until 2019, the correct way was to go with your own cup or with your own pot to get coffee, and then suddenly it was not allowed anymore. Another example for Europe was the single-use plastics. While there were already all the laws in place which were prohibiting or minimizing the use of them in everyday life, but then suddenly all these rules were relaxed, as it was considered healthier and safer to use something just once as opposed to using it several times. What we see is that already this this trend and the need to optimize sustainability and to protect environment as much as possible is coming back. And again, which is of course very good. And again, everybody is trying to move in this direction. Now, couple of other let's say potential problems that we believe we may see in the near future, and this may be a potential may create potentially difficulties going forward, is that today we operate in an environment where quantitative easing is at its maximum, public debt is at its maximum, together with very low interest rates. And on the other hand, we are already seeing inflationary pressure because of everything I described a couple of minutes ago. So this is potentially an unstable situation where, especially for Europe, where very often we're not as pragmatic as you are in the US. Plus, you have, let's say, we don't have a common strategy like you do with respect to public debt and the policy of the Northern European countries versus the Southern ones may lead to instabilities and potentially to another crisis like the one we faced in 2008 and onwards. And of course, at the same time, because of this quantitative easing, and which obviously helps the less healthy companies survive and carry on, this may lead to these companies getting enough, being able to raise debt, which if they will not be able to repay going forward, may lead to bankruptcies and further financial instability. So in other words, even though it seems that we are getting over this health crisis, at least at this point, especially thanks to the vaccination program, which, again, we all know that in Europe it is not moving as efficiently as it should have, but still it is moving. Still, next year, this year and next year, and potentially a couple of next years, will still be quite interesting from a financial point of view. Peter?
Yes, thank you very much. Belén.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Menelaos. Hi, everybody. My name is Belén, and thank you very much to Peter for the introduction and for having me here today. It's very, very exciting to be back, quote unquote, back with WPI. I watched the short video just ahead of this event with the students on their projects abroad, and it made me feel quite emotional and sentimental. So it's very, very happy to be here today. Thanks for having me. I currently work in the banking sector, and specifically my area is global markets. So, financial industry is quite vast, quite big. So I will try to focus my thoughts on the post-pandemic outlook for global markets, for capital markets. I think, that just like every other industry, the financial sector was caught completely unprepared by this global pandemic. And I think the banks and our clients have been dealing with quite a few challenges throughout the last year. So just to touch on some of the main areas that we saw impacted, I would say first and foremost, our clients were massively impacted. Obviously, within global markets, our clients can be from all walks of the global economy. So we cover financial institutions, we speak to corporations, we deal with the private banking sector, which then also leads into the retail world. So our clients had a whole host of different needs. Some of them needed access to financing, funding, at a time when funding was quite critical. Some of them needed to readjust their portfolios, readjust their investments because of the revaluation and the repricing of the markets. And it was quite a difficult time to be able to provide that kind of service to our clients. The knock-on effect from that was the volatility that we were seeing in the markets across the board. Every single market was massively impacted by this. Volatility spiked up, and at the same time, liquidity, which is effectively how many trades go through the market and how we facilitate trades between clients, completely dried up. So, the question is, how do you make markets? How do you provide prices to buy and sell at the same time when nobody's willing to buy or sell at the current market prices? So that's kind of the main challenge that you have to deal with. So it gets to the point where, in order to do a transaction, the cost that somebody has to pay is quite extraordinary, quite vast, and you see your clients taking quite painful trades that you wish they don't have to take. So it's quite a difficult situation to manage. But that said, I think difficulty with the markets, difficulty with market liquidity, it wasn't something new to banks. Obviously, there have been huge financial crises in the past. Even in the last 10 years, we've seen large financial crises. So that was not something that was new to the banks to deal with. So that's kind of a little bit of experience under the belt, and we kind of knew what to do. Where I think things came a little more tricky and a little more tough to deal with, where it was uncharted territory, was having to actually deal with our human capital, having to deal with our talent, our people. How do we protect them and do what's best for them? Which, in Europe, the guidance was very much to stay at home, whilst you're also trying to challenge a very tricky financial market environment, and you're trying to provide liquidity and help your clients manage their exposures to the financial markets. So that was, the additional factor that was thrown into the picture, which was very, very difficult to manage. So what ended up happening actually was that quite a few of our colleagues had to remain working and had to kind of almost keep the markets running, because it just wasn't feasible to send everybody home. Now, you might then ask the question, why wasn't that feasible? Why weren't the banks able to just kind of put things in a bit of an autopilot mode and rely on their digital technologies and let the show be managed in that way. And I think that's kind of the one thing that we realized and we had to come to terms with throughout this pandemic. It was that the banks, from a digitalization perspective, were not 100% ready to deal with a pandemic of this size and this this importance. So I think what we saw was a very fast deployment of new digital technologies. We started to increase our ability to quote transactions, live transactions, large size transactions through our AIs, through our automated trading systems. Whereas in the past, these AIs, these automated liquidity providing models that we had were still there, but they were only calibrated to run for quite small size transactions. They were built to free up our time, free up our colleagues' times, to allow them to kind of not deal with small transactions, to automate their small transactions and focus their efforts on dealing with big transactions in person by voice. And what we had to do was kind of increase the capacity of our digital trading capabilities to a point where it was able to take more of the burden. Therefore, we were able to kind of send more of our traders to work from home in a situation that was more safe for them. So I think with all those things combined, those were the challenges that were dealt with banks in the first couple of months of the pandemic. I think we're now at a very different place. I think we are now at a place where the digitalization that has happened over the last year is unbelievable. And a lot of things are happening in a more automated manner. So you may say that COVID was a very good chief digital officer. However, we're now finding ourselves in a kind of different position with new hurdles ahead of us. So obviously we're kind of coming out of this phase where health was the biggest crisis, and we're about to, as Menelaus also touched upon it just a few minutes ago, we're about to enter into a period where it's no longer going to be a health crisis, but also a health and economic crisis here in the UK and also in Europe as well. There were furlough schemes introduced by all of the governments, and effectively it meant that the people who could just stay home, don't go to work, and actually be paid something like 80 to 60% of their working salary. So the size of this kind of economic aid was vast. And these economic aids are still running to this day and currently in the process of being unwound. So we're about to enter into a phase where this economic aid will stop. Businesses will resume and they will find it very difficult to navigate environment, and the credit distress will effectively start building up on the financial system. So we will start seeing companies unfortunately fail, companies that will not make it, and this will effectively create a lot of bad credit in the system, which will have to be obviously written off by the banks. So this is one of the things that we're gearing up to deal with. At the same time, there's inflationary pressures are definitely building, both as a result of the massive amounts of money that has been pumped into the system, with higher interest rates, with kind of weaker, with stronger dollar and weaker emerging market currencies, and with higher commodity prices. I think we're going to be one day shocked to see the dollar in our pockets is now able to buy a lot less than what we're used to seeing it by. And then I think, last but not least, I think, there's a bit of pressure on the banks as to whether they will be able to maintain these, let's say, emergency measures they put in place, whether that is regarding sending their people home and allowing them to work from home and putting a lot more digital tools in place, or whether the banks are going to say when everything is over, all right, guys, come back to normal, forget what happened. We all work from the office, nobody works from home, and we go back to our old ways. I think this is still something that has not been addressed. I think there is going to be a bit of a let's say, some friction between banks and their employees when it comes to how the future is going to look for people working in the financial industry going forward. Thank you very, very much for that. And Peter, back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you. We have a few minutes for discussion, and some questions have come in, and there seem to be some common themes across the way the pandemic has forced some rethinking. And I would say in strategy, sovereignty, supply chains, and solidarity, for lack of a better term. You might put it sustainability if we wanted to add another S. One of the questions then is raised about as the pandemic has kind of clamped down on globalization, the question is less globalization a good thing for some of these areas like sustainability? I know I was mentioned that. I mean, there's several challenges of transitions that have in technology, digital transformations and so forth that were ongoing before the pandemic. The pandemic has accelerated some and maybe halted others temporarily. But what is your sense of how the pandemic has changed the outlook for globalization?
Yeah, why don't I start then?
Yeah.
Yes, so clearly for supply chains, globalization is actually there's a deflationary force for many years. And again, the big focus on efficiency as opposed to resilience. And of course, COVID is now flipping the as a thought, where people are thinking, well, maybe resilience should also be a bigger element given what we've seen, and therefore, that will have maybe more of an inflationary standpoint. But if I look also, sort of Philip's goals in terms of sustainability, I mean, if I look at the biggest impact activities for sustainability, is really about being able to do upgradability, remote servicing, monitoring energy consumption. So these are things that have a big impact in terms of sustainability, but are effectively technology enabled. I mean, specifically in the case of healthcare, for example, maybe people don't realize, but a hospital emits about 2.5 times green gases than other buildings. So there is a lot that can be done in terms of technology, which can be done again remotely, regardless of where it's based. So from a standpoint of there's less globalization, more favorable sustainability, clearly there's some trade-offs to make on supply chain. But if I think about sustainability and some of the things that I've at least seen, it's really very much around technology and being able to virtualize a lot of things that today are done in a physical way.
I agree with Sergio, and what I would like to add is that there is I don't think that more. Okay, apart maybe from the carbon footprint, because it is one thing to bring something from China to the US or to Europe. It's another thing to bring from one European country to another, or from one US state to the other. But apart from that, sustainability is more a frame of mind, how you do business, as opposed to and I'm talking about more manufacturing. but of course, everything you said about technology is absolutely correct as well, and the technology affects manufacturing. But it is how you do whatever you do. Now, whether you do it in China, in Africa, in Asia, or in the US, it doesn't matter. So it is not necessarily, you don't have to distinguish between globalization versus sustainability. Sustainability can and should be a main focus wherever you produce.
Yeah, I think from my side, maybe I can add just one comment, is that I think while sustainability was a number of years ago something that was kind of pioneered, right now, today, the direction of travel is definitely for it to become the norm. And I think this is something that we see in the financial markets with companies coming to raise financing, raise debt. So one of the products that was around even when I started in banking was green bonds. That was that was a product that always existed, but today the amount of sustainable financing that goes through the markets is exponentially grown. And on top of that, I think the main driver of that is the investors are asking for it. So when a company, when a corporation says, I need to raise debt, I need access to investors, and we have those conversations and roadshows. The number of questions that link to sustainability and how a company does their business and what's the direction of travel for their business is very much driven by that thought process now. So I think it is more and more becoming the norm rather than something niche.
I think we'll have one more question, and this is kind of a combination of something that's come up in the questions and in the chat, and one that I have for you all. There was an emphasis on the talent development and transformation, what it looks like today. What advice would you give to current WPI students who are about to enter this post-pandemic world? If you were to meet a student, what would you tell her about what advice to succeed in the economy and that they're about to enter?
Let me take that first. So I think we've all experienced the WPI plan, and I think it is extremely relevant still today, because what I've seen again in healthcare, but frankly also throughout career, is that just the technology push or just technology is not enough. Having the skills for change management and ultimately I would say leadership to get people to make the change is a fundamental skill, whether it's an engineer or a business major. Ultimately, we cannot do big things alone. We need to bring other people alongside, and it's astonishing as to how many times companies, and I see startups, really going, full on, with a very technology-driven proposition, and really de-emphasizing everything that goes around it, because ultimately you're trying to get people to work differently. You're trying to get people to do things that they are obviously not doing today with a lot of these new tools and new processes. And being able to navigate those human organizations to do this is probably, I have found, the most important skill.
On my side, I think my advice, or what I would say to WPI students today is I would very much agree with Sergio. I would tell them that they're very well placed to do well in in the economy as it is today, in the business world as it is today. We've all kind of here have technical degrees, but actually, what you find is that you don't need to work in a technical field with a technical degree, because every kind of business, every industry out there currently has massive needs and massive requirements to bring in engineers, programmers, mathematicians, and people just that can think differently to the way their business is designed. I think, you know, in finance at the moment, we want to recruit 50% of our graduates, 50% of our incoming workforce from science and technology backgrounds. That's 50% of the people that work in my bank do not hold finance and economics degrees. And I think that's an astonishing number. So I would tell them that they're very well placed to succeed extremely well in anything that they put their eyes to.
Menelaus, do you have any thoughts to bring us home? I think we may have a frozen screen. Thank you very much to all of you for this wonderful discussion. I wish we had more time. There's lots of Menelaus, your screen is unfrozen.
I lost for a moment.
All right.
No.
Do you have any thoughts about that last advice for students?
No, I absolutely agree. Like an engineer and having that WPI is certainly a very good place to get engineering and technical background. But the good thing and one of the strengths of WPI is that together with that, you get the opportunity to grow from a social and more, let's say, more general perspective, which is really important if you want to have an impact, whatever you're doing. You know, just being a hardcore engineer is not enough. And WPI is the place and the way it has been evolving over the years that will foster this kind of more, let's say, general approach to society. Because, like you said, you do need everything is a team effort. You cannot do something on your own.
Thank you for that advice and those words of wisdom. And thank you very much to all of you for this presentation. I hope we have a chance soon to meet in person, whether that is here in Worcester or at the various places where you're located. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dean Jean King, who will moderate and introduce the next panel. But thank you once again to Sergio.
You.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Our watch today. It's been a wonderful morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll wait for Rachel to put up the slide. There we go. All right. And again, I'd like to welcome you to the Global School Virtual Events Focus on Europe today. And in this component, which is the last component of this segment, we will talk about the circular economy, the future of the Earth. And we're doing this on the eve of Earth Day. It cannot be better in terms of the best time we could talk about the Earth, right? And we're talking about the Earth today from a different perspective. So for those of you who have not joined the Critical Conversation before, there's a specific format, but more importantly, the Critical Conversations were developed here at WPI to a national and international issue in a timely fashion. And we generally do it from several perspectives, several disciplines. And of course, we bring together this team in a way that's so transdisciplinary that we learn a lot about the particular theme from different perspectives. So today we have an esteemed panel that will be talking about the future of the Earth. Tomorrow, in Earth Day, over 1 billion people across the planet will be celebrating in some way the future of the Earth. The theme for this year is Restore Our Earth. And we are really happy today to have different perspectives at WPI talking about this in such a timely fashion. Again, our esteemed panelists, who I'll introduce now, they will then present to you, similar to the last panel, for about 5 minutes each. We'll then return as an entire panel, and I'll take questions, which you could put in the Q&A right now as we go along, and then I'll ask those questions. We'll moderate the panel. It's a very quick panel, so get on it. We're ready to go. So our esteemed panel, first up, we'll speak to and we'll have a chance to hear from Professor Joe Sarkis. Joe Sarkis is a professor in the School of Foisey Business School here at WPI. Next up is Associate Professor Mike Timko, who again is here at WPI and in the Chemical Engineering Department. Lorene Elgott will be next up. She's an Associate Professor in Social Science and Policy Studies here at WPI. Then we have Elke Rundenstein, who is the Smith Dean Professor of Computer Science and Data Science here at WPI, followed by one of our collaborators, Adrian Bury. And Adrian comes to us from ZHV in Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and in the engineering school. We'd love to give a round of applause, which we all on campus, to our esteemed panel. And let's start off with Professor Joe Sarkis. Joe?
Thank you, Dean King, let me see, am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. I'm the first speaker here, so I kind of set the baseline as to what the circular economy might be. And I took it from a perspective of Europe and the world in this case, because we are talking about Europe. And some of the issues that were discussed in the previous sessions, especially our alumni panel, were very interesting and relate to what I am presenting here and what we might be presenting later. First of all, the circular economy. It's a broad-based scope of practices. It incurs and keeps materials within the system. So you don't have to mine new materials. You don't generate more waste. It's a very efficient way of managing the resources, our natural resources. And tomorrow being Earth Day, this is a perfect topic to start us to talk about how these resources can be managed effectively at multiple levels. In this case, the economic level could be global or could be based on a continental area. Here are a couple models that are very popular and at different levels of analysis. I won't go through them, but notice the loops. These are loops in the supply chain and making a sustainable supply chain of materials, making sure that the materials keep their life without having them used up from a natural resources perspective. And the later panelists will talk more about that. Next slide, please. So again, taking a broader background historical perspective, I've been studying this for a while, right? For at least 3 decades, let's say, but not necessarily the term circular economy, which is a more commonly used term now, popular term. Before then, it was used in different ways: reverse logistics, reverse supply chains, and so on. Use of industrial ecology, industrial ecosystems. And what you see here is an evolution that it has been a global effort. It goes back to Germany actually using the term. And in this case, they were trying to reduce landfill requirements so that waste did not take up the landfills. It was actually a space saver more than anything else. Japan faced the same thing. They're an island nation, and they needed circular economy practices for a number of reasons. And one of the interesting reasons that Japan brought on was to stimulate the economy. So it became an economic policy while still allowing for the saving of resources, natural resources primarily. The US introduced the concept of eco-industrial park in the 90s. China was one of the biggest movers in making the circular economy a core aspect of their economic policies in the mid-2000s. And then Europe has come on very strong in the last decade, especially the last 3 or 4 years, where multiple nations have tried to develop the circular economy and circular economy ideas. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that has come to the forefront, and again, this was a topic discussed by our previous panelists, was what are the lessons from COVID in the circular economy, especially within Europe? And there's a number of issues that arose during this time. And we did a study of looking at COVID and the circular economy, as well as technology and their relationships. And we published a few papers related to this. Essentially, what the circular economy allows organizations, allows communities to do is to help localize as well as build agility of their supply chains. So it's a very effective tool to do this. Now in Europe, for example, they needed ventilators. You could repair and extend the life of ventilators. Italy, and there's case studies of in Italy using these ventilators because of the high demand. This essentially showed that there was a health social issue, and they were able to build this agility because of the emergency situation. If there's disruptions and emergencies, the circular economy or circular economy principles can work. The idea of pivoting organizations, the agility, being able to change over very quickly from one to the other. And France and Germany, there was examples of those countries and the support of their industries to help them develop byproducts, which is part of the circular economy practices for things like disinfectants and as well as byproducts for textiles, for personal protective equipment. More circular economy principles that can help from a resilience perspective as well. And in this case here, by building localized channels, you can actually be less dependent on materials flowing from overseas. I even asked the question last panel session is globalization good or not good for sustainability? But circular economy can help you do a little bit of both, localize, but also maintain. And one of the critical conversations we should be having is, should the circular economy be global or not? I have that as a question in the next slide. And the last thing for the European situation is Europe is going back to some of the original ideas of using the circular economy for not only sustainability improvement, but for economic development. And the European Green Deal has this circular economy, as you see there in the figure, as a major aspect of an economic stimulus mechanism to bring it back or bring back stronger after the COVID crisis in the pandemic. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we ask, because we are talking about globalization and the circular economy,
You're muted, Joe.
and something that we've discussed in our papers, to be globally effective, you need collaboration. And we mentioned transdisciplinary collaboration. You'll see some of my colleagues from various disciplines and so on in a big program that we're involved with. You need data and information exchange, not just materials. You need to know what's available, what's not available. We've been studying this from the perspective of blockchain and digitalization to be able to manage circular economy. It can be designed for different loops and supply chains in mind. Again, there's local to global levels of analysis that can be done with the circular economy, and it needs to be determined which is the most effective way of doing this. And you need to design a global logistics and regulatory system. Globalization without some kind of good regulatory system to not take advantage of other countries, developing countries, informal economies, is necessary. And I mentioned these as the next slides on the side here. Now, don't go to the next slide, but on the right-hand side of the slide, that you need to consider not only sustainability from the environmental perspective, but you also need to consider it from a social perspective. And we've looked into equity, inclusiveness, justice, and of course, climate change are also issues that need to be discussed when you're talking about circular economy. And I give examples here. Circular economy does have unintended consequences that can be negative from a social aspect, and those need to be carefully examined. Next slide, please. And finally, from a personal experience, I'm involved in a major project, not only at WPI, but collaborating across the world. And I wanted to give one example of my collaboration in Europe. I have more than one example, but this is one where we're actually setting up something in France, the north of France, which is actually a socioeconomically lower region than rest of Europe. And we're looking into technology, transportation, and circular economy with another polytechnic university at the north of France that was just developed. And we're looking to see if we can not only do a sustainable development aspect for the regional area, but also economic development. And we're going to actually it's going to be a global effort where we have colleagues from all over the world who have worked in circular economy being involved. And I think that's it. And our next speaker would be Professor Mike Timko.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. That was a terrific introduction. So Joe gave, I think, a really nice broad overview. And so what I'm going to do here is to take a deep dive into just one example, one concrete example of how a circular economy can play out in terms of the R&D and then moving towards translational research to make it into practice. And so my group specifically focuses on chemical technologies and specifically waste to energy. And so, if the idea of the circular economy is to eliminate the idea of waste, then we need to have good final applications for it that add value. And our focus has been energy, fuels, chemicals, and materials. And you'll see those different examples as we go through 3 different vignettes. And then on this slide, I just show some of the folks who have helped us out over the years or are currently helping us out right now. I'll spotlight for now the Fulbright organization, who provided fellowship to myself and has offered one to one of our students for me to work in France and for the student to work in Denmark. And I'm highlighting that to show the interactions that the group has with European researchers. And on the right-hand side, we have some of our domestic collaborators, as well as on the far right, some of our primary European collaborators. So on SEEK is a lab in northern France, Nancy. Unicampi is they kind of stowed away, but they're such a strong collaborator, I've included them. They're in Brazil. University of Hohenheim is in Germany. IMCB is a national lab type facility in southern France, Bordeaux. And then Aalborg University is our partner in Denmark. So if you can go to the next slide. So I bring those folks up because, working with people outside, outside of WPI is just a huge benefit to everything we do. It gives opportunities to our students. It gives access to new waste streams, different ways of thinking, different technologies, and different instrumentation as well. So our motivation is waste, and we're focused here on municipal solid waste. These are all data from the US EPA showing per capita and total generations of municipal solid waste. And basically what happens to the overwhelming majority of this waste is, as you show on the bottom left, is it gets bulldozed and landfilled, where it contributes to global greenhouse gas emissions due to formation of methane, as well as water problems. But actually on the right-hand side, we see that the components of municipal solid waste, there are several. Many of them, like food waste, wood waste, yard trimmings, plastics, paper, all of these things have energy. And so the idea to me, the idea of just leaving that energy on the table and burying it in a pit doesn't make any sense. And so we've been looking at ways that we can convert that, those wastes into things that we can use. So the next slide, please. And so we just have 3 vignettes. The first vignette here talks about our converting food waste to fuels. And so on the bottom left, you see photographs where we convert food waste, grind it up, and then we do a thermal process where we make it into an oil. And we're able to collect, at this point, upwards of 50% of the energy present in food waste and make it into a fuel. And so that's the basic idea. And then the students and the team working on this include very capable students, Heather Leclerc and Renish Shritha at the top. At the bottom, Mishak Adu and Caroline Murphy. Jeff Thompson and Andrew Teixeira are faculty that are collaborating with me on this one. And just some things that they've done, some great work they've done. Jeff is a recipient of the 2019 Clennion Award. Heather is recipient of several different fellowships, including some from the National Science Foundation. Caroline's MQP actually was picked up in several different news outlets, and you see one of the headlines there. And then we've also had some of our research spotlighted, for instance, in journal covers, and that's the the whimsical cartoon on the far left showing our catalyst as a spaceship destroying the negative byproducts that we were sometimes seeing. And so we were able to use that catalyst to increase the yields of the good products that we want. So if you go to the next slide, so that's food waste. Another area, well, food waste to fuels. Another area is converting different kinds of wastes, including food waste, into adsorbents. And this is also a thermal process, but now instead of maximizing the fuel, we're maximizing the solid product, which we show a cartoon representation on the far left of what it kind of looks like. Up on the upper right is what it visually looks like. And then in the bottom left are some of the people we've been working with. And so at WPI, faculty collaborator is Professor Aaron Deskins. Max Moran is currently finishing up his master's on this. Avery Brown was a former student on the project, now at Dow Chemical. And then Andreas Kruse is a faculty in Germany who actually hosted Avery for his for part of his PhD. And then last is Klaus Schmidt-Rohr, who has a name that sounds like he could be in Europe. He's actually of German ancestry, but he's anything but in Europe. He's actually at Brandeis University just down the street. And so, you know, with that team and with that time spent over in Germany, we published a very nice paper, several papers, but one that I'm highlighting here that shows how this material works and how effective it can be specifically for removing metals from drinking water, which as events in Flint, Michigan and all around the world really have shown, this remains a persistent problem in many locations. So our last slide. So the last vignette is collaboration with colleagues at WPI, including Professor Nick Kazantzis and Professor Randy Paffenroth, both shown there. And the student working on this is Liz Belden, who also just received a fellowship from the National Science Foundation. The basic idea is that because we don't have a circular economy, we have huge amounts of waste entering our environment instead. And as many of you know, if not everybody knows at this point in time, what's happening is that our oceans are basically becoming huge trash cans. And so photographs are shown there on the bottom left. And the question we had is this situation so dire that we actually need to be proactive and get out and get the waste? Now, of course, we also need to turn off the tap, so to speak, and prevent the waste from coming in to begin with. But current estimates suggest we have decades of waste accumulated there. I mean, decades to get rid of it. So should we be proactive in removing it? And so Liz's analysis was an analysis to see if there was enough energy in those waste streams out in the middle of the ocean to actually self-power the cleanup. And what she learned, which is really cool, is that yes, but. And so the answer, what that means is that it's possible, but you need to be very careful about how you design your process. So you need to have very good engineering to do it, which is kind of what we're showing on the far right. I'm also happy to announce that the paper is no longer to be submitted. So at Belden et al. 2021, it was submitted actually as of last Friday. And from what I hear, it's moving through the review process smoothly so far. So, those are just a few examples. And we could sit here and give many other concrete examples, many other ways that my group alone is doing different chemical technologies to enable circular economies. But also, if we open up that lens and look at companies and universities, we can see that we're hitting a tipping point where there seems to be really a philosophical approach that is gaining steam, both because the benefits to the environment, but as Joe so articulately pointed out, also because oftentimes we can find win-win situations. And so we can find a resource that people are willing to pay you to get rid of and make something valuable out of it. So our next speaker then is Professor Laureen Elgert, and I'll cede the floor to her now.
Thank you, Mike. I'll jump right in. I'm going to talk a little bit about the justice implications of the circular economy, which were alluded to by Joe really nicely in the introduction. So while there's growing interest in ideas around the circular economy, there's been some critique of it that it has seemingly left out that third leg of sustainability, which is equity and justice. And these principles of equity and justice are often sort of an awkward pairing with environmental and economic concerns. So often social justice becomes an afterthought that's not integrated into research and policy advocacy in the area of circular economy. And so I'm going to outline a few reasons why we really need to highlight justice concerns while pursuing this circular economy. So next slide, please. So first, while it seems common sense that waste is bad for everyone, we know that waste is worse for vulnerable communities. So poor communities and communities of color are much more likely to be negatively impacted by waste than wealthier, whiter communities. So it seems to follow that less waste is good for everyone, but perhaps even better for vulnerable communities. But of course, it's not quite that simple. So in 2016, Massachusetts, for example, produced over 5 million tons of waste, and 3.2 million tons of this waste were diverted from landfills and were incinerated in industrial incinerators. So incineration shrinks waste 90% by volume and 75% by weight. Incineration converts water to steam, which then passes through turbine generators and produces a renewable energy and renewable electricity. And it also reduces greenhouse gases by offsetting carbon emissions from fossil fuels and methane generation from landfills. And I think Mike referred to this effect. But combustion facilities also generate several forms of waste, including emissions that may contribute to acid rain, aggravate breathing problems, and that are linked to cancer and birth defects and other human health impacts. So in Massachusetts, of the 7 waste incinerators that are in the state, 6 of these are located in environmental justice communities. And environmental justice communities are defined as communities of color, low income, and communities of low English proficiency. So you can see where the justice issue lies. Next slide, please. So recycling, particularly specialty recycling, like e-waste recycling, often ends up in countries where there are few regulations in place to protect people and environments from hazardous and toxic waste. And so this picture at the top of my slide here on the right is a picture from Guayu, a city in China, that in the 2000s became famous because of the massive amounts of global e-waste transported there for recycling. Some estimates were over half of the world's e-waste ended up in this small city in China. So some private companies in the US that even offer recycling services with the guarantee that the processing of e-waste happens domestically and that the e-waste is not shipped abroad. Some companies offer this, but there are some doubts about the efficacy of these guarantees. So in 2018, for example, a watchdog organization called the Basel Action Network put a GIS tracker in some e-waste that they took to such a facility and indeed found out that it was shipped overseas and not processed domestically. So the Basel Convention is an international agreement that regulates international flows of hazardous waste. But the US, along with Haiti, remains the only country yet to ratify this agreement. So just some food for thought around the international flows of hazardous and toxic waste that sometimes are associated with recycling. So next slide. So a little bit about sustainability for some can often mean widening social and economic disparities. And I use the example of the energy transitions. So sustainability transitions generally, usually, if not always, have predetermined winners and losers. And there's growing evidence from environmental sociology that shows how the energy transition, the current energy transition towards renewables, is increasing inequalities by increasing energy poverty in the US among vulnerable households. So energy poverty is the idea that poor households, due to a combination of factors, including low income, increasing utility rates, and inefficient buildings and appliances, spend a hugely and growingly disproportionate amount of their income on energy. And as energy costs increase, so does this proportion of their income they spend on energy. So this is basically the concept of energy poverty. So wealthier households are more likely to own properties than rent, and they have more incentive to invest in energy efficiency and renewable technologies. And furthermore, the shift to renewable energy is done through incentives such as subsidies, which reduces the energy costs for homeowners that can afford to install solar panels, for example, or buy energy efficient appliances. But it also serves to drive up the price of fossil fuel energy as utility companies seek to recapture losses. And this has been documented in many different areas, many different regions across the US. So this means that increased utility bills for the rest of the customers become a reality. And for many low-income families, this increased financial pressure creates this cycle of energy poverty. Next slide. So reducing waste at the source where possible, at the point of consumption, of course, remains the best way of designing waste out of our production and consumption systems. And so we need to not lose sight of that. Indeed, we have a long way to go on this point, and plastics provide a really good example of this. So although companies that make and sell plastic often push the idea that recycling is the answer to plastic pollution problem, the plastic pollution problem, 6 times more plastic waste is incinerated than is recycled. So it's just not finding its way into the recycling cycle. So plastic is often contaminated by other materials, and consumer goods companies are reluctant to buy this recycled plastic unless it's really as pure as so-called virgin plastic. Moreover, because of the glut of natural gas and the resulting boom in US petrochemical production, virgin plastic can become, in some economic cycles, cheaper than recycled plastic. So things like planned obsolescence is also a persistent part of this problem. The idea that buying new is cheaper and more convenient than repairing. Just yesterday, actually, the US Public Interest Research Group, US PIRG, held a webinar on the right to repair and how really, changing the culture towards the right to repair and repairing appliances, repairing electronics as opposed to replacing them is really a vital part of the quest for zero waste. So next slide. So in conclusion, none of these potential problems of the circular economy for justice and equity concerns is inherent. Each is socially produced and can be addressed and mitigated through policies, programs, and incentives that anticipate the problems, or at least recognize the problems, and create deliberate pathways to access, equity, and justice. But these concerns and the political and intellectual will to address them must be central in any approach to advancing the circular economy. And with that, I turn it over to Professor Elke Rudensteiner.
Well, thank you. I am realizing that we are terribly behind. I guess we're academicians and we like to talk. So I will do my best to stay super brief so that there's time left for questions. First, let me introduce myself. So I am a faculty in computer science, and I am the founding director of data science at WPI. At first, it may seem, how does that all fit into the circular economy, what I'm working on? The next slide. So let me agree that I'm actually a complete newbie at these concepts of circular economy. I'm raised in an environment as a little child where recycling, reuse, repair instead of buying new was actually more of the norm than I find it to be nowadays, as surprising as it may seem. But in what we are looking at the big picture, and as all of my colleagues have already stressed, is we are still often in this linear economy where we as consumers are used to not repair things, but buy a new piece. One shot, go to Amazon, buy something, and we are quite satisfied to our social wealth and our expectations on society. So this has to change, this one shot, building things so that we can satisfy our immediate need rather than taking a much more long-term view towards the world is something that critically has to change. And this is where the circular economy comes from. Next slide. My colleague has already explained this in depth, so I will not spend much time here. But ultimately, we're looking at many different factors. It includes how to change processes themselves, how any manufacturing, any design process we build, how do we make them more effective? How do we be more efficient, waste less energy, produce less negative or polluting side effects? That's one big aspect. Another one is, how do we work with other companies and partners so that we can understand the side product that we produce? How can they be leveraged? And there are many, many different examples, particularly in Europe, for a city to understand what heat is being produced, what water is being used, and how it can be used for other factors or other services throughout the city. And the third one is that Mike has described to you in depth, my colleague. There are many ways of taking waste and doing really creative ways of reusing it, changing it, to put it back to use so that it doesn't create landfills. All of these processes have something in common. All of them require us or are generating data. And this is basically where my view of all of it comes in. The next slide. This is a badly chosen slide, but the point I want to make is data is what is driving. It used to be oil to drive much of the American economy. And it is now data that is driving many of our decision making. We need data to understand, for example, how the processes have been optimized and if they're running more efficient. We need data about other companies and what do they really need. We need data and knowledge to understand what is the impact that is being made on other societies and other countries that are being impacted by the choices that we make. Without data and without evidence-driven decision-making, we will not be able to persuade stakeholders. And in order to address these concerns that all my colleagues have raised, we all have to work together. So that's very clear. It has to be from policies to scientists. An individual student in our labs at WPI have to understand that the processes that they are working on and that they are optimizing, what is the outcome of them and what is the longer term impact? So the work that we do and the process of how we're training our students has to be done within context and a deeper understanding of all the impacts. So this is where I see data science coming in, because in order to make data-driven decision-making, we need to be able to retrain our students to be able to do so and do so broadly. And companies have recognized that. The next slide. So companies have recognized this, and there is a lot of emphasis now on data-driven decision-making. For this, we have an interdisciplinary degree at WPI, namely data science, that combines skills from analytics, from taking data and turning it into insights, talking to stakeholders, the business aspects to understand what the data is being used for, with the ultimate aim to solve important societal problems. In this case, our focus here is on sustainability and circular economy. Next slide. So what we want to do is to go from a world that is non-sustainable to a world that is sustainable. And I wanted to point in particular at a recent success that we have had here at WPI. We have developed a center called CEDAR, representing the cedar tree, the green on the right, that really brings together all the important stakeholders. In fact, everybody that's on this panel as we speak is participating in this effort. It is funded by the National Science Foundation that has recognized the importance of bringing really diverse stakeholders together, from business, circular economy, to chemical engineers, and so on, to together work on this really critical problem that affects our world. NSF has funded us to train students and provide these fellowships, 30 of them. But the impact will be much larger because we're going to be training hundreds or more students with these new ways of training. And they gave us $3 million to support these fellows. What particular are these students going to be doing? They're going to be trained in, most importantly, into understanding the bigger context and talking to each other while developing the right computational and analytic skills to effect change. So next slide. So right now, this process, this project is just starting. It is the key thing I want to emphasize here is it is a campus-wide initiative. We have social scientists and basically everybody that's speaking at this panel involved that you have seen already, from data science, mathematical science, to computer science on the one hand, to sciences such as physics, chemistry, biology, and then all the way to engineering that is really driving much of that, which is, for example, chemical engineering, but also civil and environment engineering, material science. We have faculty involved that you see here, but within a few days, we will be able to replace these by student pictures because we literally have now hired 6 PhD fellows that are spread across these disciplines. So we have somebody in biology, somebody in chemical engineering, a data scientist, and so on, and somebody in the School of Business. So we will now have very smart, capable students that will work together to take on these initiatives. Because we need both. We need an understanding of the process, but we need future generation of students that are leaders and be able to take on these really important challenges. They cannot just be technicians, engineers, or data scientists. They also need to have the context of the much broader world. So the most important thing that I believe these students need to learn is to talk to other disciplines, understand the bigger picture, and jointly as a team collaborate to solve these problems. And this is what our new center sets out to achieve. With this, I would like to introduce my colleague, Adrian Burry from Switzerland, who is graciously serving on the advisory board of this center.
Thank you, Alke, for the introduction. I'm happy to, or pleased to talk here to you, to the you're all experts in circular economy, and to talk to you about how we are doing this topic here in Switzerland, especially at the University of Applied Science in Winterthur. Next slide, please. I'm the head of the Center for Product and Process Development. This is one of the departments in the School of Engineering. And in Switzerland, it's like that our university, we have 50% of our job we are doing is education for bachelor, master degree students. In our center, especially for the mechanical engineering students. But we have also a lot of staff, researchers, and also the lecturers and the professors are doing applied research projects. And those projects are in strong cooperation with Swiss or also EU industry partners. And we do really research projects to problems where industries have, help them to find solution and to explore new innovations. And of course, we learn during those research projects quite a lot that we then implement in our courses, so that students learn exactly what is going on out there in the industry. In our institute, we do those research projects, especially in the product development, design thinking, innovation development. We have a strong group in gear research. We do quite a lot of things in additive manufacturing, especially in metal. And for product development, very important is, of course, all the 3D data you have for visualization, simulation, and Industry 4.0, what is very modern at the moment. But we have built up since only 2 years more competences in circular economy, because all the quite good things we are going to invent and find new innovation and new products, if they are not from the beginning designed for a circular economy, we have done not a good job. Because all products that are out there and you can buy, they are designed as a linear product, and we have to change that. And we have to change it very fast. So we have to know how can we design products and processes that they are designed in a circular economy way. And for that, we have brought together quite a lot of experts in Switzerland who are all interested to learn about how we can do that and to implement that principles or learn how that can be done, and to bring that knowledge, of course, out into the industry and to students. Next slide, please. One of these initiatives that we have built up together with different universities is this new national thematic network called Applied Circular Sustainability. This is a new program that we could launch this year, and it goes for 4 years. And we are financed by the Swiss government and gives us the possibility to finance starting point of ideas of new circular products. And if you remember the cycle also shown by Joseph at the beginning, you have this biological and the technical cycle. When you have circular economy products, you have products that can be reused as a technical way, like metal, aluminium, etc. They don't lose their specification and you can reuse them endless. Or you have a biological cycle, you have materials that can be reused in that science that you make another product out of that, or you have it's a biological nutrients. You can build new materials out of this biological material. But in the product development, if you design in the picture in the middle, that's a cover of a standard household mixer. A standard household mixer, for example, consists 20 different plastic materials and 10 different metal materials. And you are not able to reuse those materials because it's not designed that you can reuse all those materials and connect. You can only throw them away and on landfill, or you can burn the plastic, but not what you want. So we have to rethink how can we design standard products according those principles of to having two different cycles, that you have materials that you at end of lifetime you're able to separate those different materials and bring them back in those cycles. One other product we are involved is we have redesigned the way people are on the move in cities. We have designed this city vehicle called B-Car. It's a combination of a bicycle and a car. As you see, it's very small, only for one person to go from A to B in a city. And this is also a philosophy when you have not only to design products in a way that they are reusable or the materials are usable, you also redesign the specifications of products. You don't have to drive 5 kilometers in a city with a 2-ton vehicle. That's also lost material of waste. If even you've designed the pickup that it's a circular economy, it's still not sustainable. So you have also redesigned how products are designed completely from scratch. And this is this network will help us that we have can support ideas that are out there. Their startups have, that companies have. We can support in the beginning to show them how can they do that. And redesign the materials, redesign the products, implement also circular business models. Of course, you can't have a circular economy without a circular business model. You have to think about how can you finance these cycles and how are the customers involved in those cycles. So I hope you can hear about what we are financing in the future if you are following us, this applied circular sustainability, online media, etc. Thanks a lot.
so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the entire panel for such great information. It has been fabulous. I've learned so much. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for questions. We literally have no time for questions, but we will take your questions. If you have questions directly for any of our professors, please reach out to me or to Rachel Roy, and we'll send those questions on, and they will certainly get back to you. What we need to say here is, on the eve of Earth Day, there is so much great research being done. I love the idea that this is all CEDA. So in here is not just how we do that work, but how we collect that data, and we have that data help us make better decisions. So I am grateful for the way WPI has actually taken the lead in pulling in all of our other colleagues. And Adrian, thank you so much. We are so grateful to the Swiss group. You have always been there for us and have helped us so much along the way. So our students get to hear a lot of different perspectives today on the circular economy. We have never done this for 45 minutes, so it was really, really quick. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 to get to the depth of different areas that we covered today. But on behalf of everyone here, I wanted to thank you. And I wanted to call my co-moderator, Peter Hansen, on to just wrap us up this morning. Peter?
Okay, thank you. And that was a wonderful discussion. I just want to look back at the day overall as a fairly unified program, despite what we might have thought at some points in the earlier planning of it. And Mark Leonard pointed out the importance of the work that we do as academics and that we do with our students to identify the wicked problems and frame them for the public, and to frame the options for policymakers. I mean, the last panel did that especially well, I think. And I want to thank everyone. The alumni panel also highlighted the transformational impact of the pandemic on multiple areas of their own business and the global economy in ways that really, merged quite well with this discussion of the circular economy. And I'm grateful for all the panelists from the alumni panel who I was able to speak with, and here in the most recent panel with the CEDAR team members. I think it's an excellent model for what the global school can do out in the world and at WPI, where we have interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches taken from across the university. So this is a big tent vision for the global school. It's not just about doing some undergraduate student projects, as important as those are, as I know full well, because, I, like many other people who have been participating today, get immense amount of satisfaction from working with our students and working with our community partners. And it's really helpful to see this kind of discussion to focus our own thinking about what we're really good at. And, the circular economy is one of those issues. And there's probably opportunities for us to identify some additional projects along those lines. I know that I'm thinking in those terms, and I just want to thank everyone again, and thank you, Jean. And do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I do. 2 people I want to thank, because I just realized we forgot to thank Crystal Brown. Thank you so much, Crystal, and Rachel Roy. None of us will be here without you. Thank you so much for all you do. And again, I want to join Peter in saying thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you. Have a very good day and have a great Earth Day tomorrow. Take care. Bye. Thank you.